via my YouTube profile at www.youtube.com/Voodoo Thai, VOO, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African Hoodoo world spiritualist of this life cycle. This is my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation, reiteration, and my ever-living reality. Make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father, Earth. And it is my personal place of power and understanding. That place from where I begin, the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co-create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co-create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe, Asheo, Ashe. Today is, what is today, you all? Thursday, February 14th, 2019. And I am emanating and vibrating with you and for you live, virtually, verbally, cosmically, quantum, universally, from this working temple of the house of the Divine Prince, Thai Potions, Enchanted City in America, New Orleans, Hoodoo Obeah, life path and journey, passing down this great Obeah stick, along with the knowledge of the healing, life-giving herbs, roots, plants, spirits, and minerals. Please do continue to join me live here, always at noon U.S. Central Standard Time, weekdays, noon U.S. Central Standard Time, for the of the DivinePrince.com. All is a blessing. And for your tour plus experience needs, for you all see us at www.oursacredstories.com. All is truly and indeed a blessing. I'm always humbled and grateful by those of you who choose to join me here at high noon U.S. Central Standard Time for the Power Lunch, Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo, Secrets and Recipes. For indeed, you could be anywhere right at this moment in time space, and you choose to spend your midday, your lunch, here in this sacred space of God's and God. Participation in the chat. If you have questions, please do type them in capital letters. This will make it easier for me to see them and sort of separate them. Bonsoir from the Aibobo, from the group, and from the other communications that might be going on live in the chat. I also ask that you show Kay Amina some respect. She is my monitor, if you will, in the chat. And she's basically looking for craziness. And we've had a few events of craziness. And so we certainly do appreciate you as well taking the time out of your day to be present. I certainly am humbled and honored by each and every one of you. And I do want to pick up Mackendall on some of the questions and comments that you last made in the last live broadcast, particularly as it relates to High John the Conqueror. I think High John the Conqueror is a great topic of discussion, in that, as with many things in our culture, in our spirit culture, in our food culture, in our musical culture, in our culture, many things have been integrated and appropriated and bastardized and commercialized and stolen and renamed, if not ignored altogether. And so High John is a great topic because it not only gives us a chance to go back in time in terms of the history of voodoo, hoodoo, conjure, root work, as it shows up with us here in America, but also it gives us an opportunity to look more specific at High John, the root, I should say the roots with an S on it, plural, itself, and the many legends, myths, and stories that have been created around that. Some of the first, most basic points I want to make is that we're talking about slavery. We're talking about a time where we were not considered human. We're talking about a time where the cattle and the sheep and the goat would have been treated with greater level of respect than we would have been in that experience. So there was no great desire for, no great push for documenting, archiving anything about us, and that which we do have has been extraordinary, has been unique, has been unusual, has been brought forward because others of other races, other ethnicities, other purposes sought to bring that story, that message forward, whether it's in antebellum slavery historically, or even today in modern times. And I've said on previous shows, our research, our study, we have to also look at the authors. Who are the authors of this information? What is their point? What is their motivation? Our archivists, our historians. And often these people don't represent us, if not, don't look like us. But even in the case that they do look like us, they often don't represent us. And in some cases, they're seeking to undo, disempower, continue the pathology of dehumanizing that which is unique to us, that is indigenous to us, and in many cases, that which is African to us. I know when we talk about voodoo and hoodoo in the Americas, we have to talk about the indigenous presence. For indeed, some of us contain that bloodline. Many of us escaped into maroonage under the assistance of our indigenous cousins, brothers, and sisters. In fact, one of my team members, Black Hawk Voodoo, we're sewing desperately. We were sewing and watching, things that documentaries and programs that run for long, long periods of time, for several hours. So we were watching Underground, the TV series Underground. And if you haven't seen that, because the series is not on now, go to Hulu. You should be able to find it in Hulu. We watched the entire season 1 in Hulu of Underground. If you are unfamiliar, Underground, in terms of the storyline, precedes Harriet Tubman. So it's not the Underground Railroad, it's the Underground. And so it's kind of builds a story around the environment of slavery, the nature of slavery, the various character roles represented within the context of slavery, and then that press for, that fire for, that desire for freedom. And I believe it's the 3rd or 4th episode in the season is when Ernestine, Steen is the big mama of the slave house, if you will. She's a house slave, but she runs the house slave. She runs the house. She was, I'm not going to tell all the story because I want you to go and watch it, but they seek to baptize her and the whole entire plantation. And of course, if Massa wants something done, then everybody does it. So they're going to have this mass baptism, if you will. And so prior to this showing up in the show, she visits the Hoodoo man. And so it for me restates that revolutionary desire for freedom. It revives, creates a revival of the true essence of what Underground, the railroad, seeking freedom, maroonage, all of that shows up in this series. So I don't want to give it all away for you. But it comes to mind because when I think about voodoo, now remember now the context of slavery, they're not seeking to empower us. They're not seeking to educate us. They're not seeking to tell us anything about ourselves. And most certainly anything that's going to upset the balance of the system, which at that time was. And so being fed any level of knowledge of self would have been, blasphemous in those environments, in that condition. So we have legends and myths always from the very beginning of those who refused to go, those who refused to be enslaved, fought back, those who jumped ship, those who committed suicide, those who murdered others in terms of their own freedom, but also preventing, for instance, their child, the next generation from being born then again into freedom. And so all of that shows up in Underground. But I believe in many ways it speaks to the very nature of what voodoo, hoodoo, root work had to be in the New World. We can look archaeologically at West Africa and even further back east at Kemet and the usage of magic, the idea of magic, the idea that magic was sort of inseparable from spirit, from our reality. And indeed, voodoo still supports that understanding. But I think in terms of really getting you all to connect authentically to what voodoo is, I think would also work to help us to remove that which is artificial, that which is not real, that which disempowers us, that which continues on the pathology of demonization and bastardization and abominizing us as indigenous people, and indeed indigenous people with a spiritual culture, a spiritual mindset that could not be whipped out of us, that could not be removed. And so I believe, and of course I'm a little bit prejudiced since we filmed Underground here in New Orleans. I believe it's one of the strongest portrayals in film, in my opinion, ever, save for that Brazilian slave movie. One of the strongest movies that truly depicts things that we did not see in Roots, that we often don't see in the typical slave narrative, particularly if it seeks to make the oppressor look bad or weak, or it seeks to empower us. So one critical arena is not only voodoo as a religious context, as a cultural context, but when we get down to the herbs, the plants, the roots, the minerals. And yes, I'm still talking about High John, so please stay with me. If you know and love your history, or you're curious and want to know about your history, you want to know this. So Underground, put that on your homework list. If you haven't already seen Underground, watch Underground. Trust me, it's profound. If you're typically triggered by abuse and lynching and that sort of contextual material in movie form or TV form, this is more intense than that. That's the only warning I'm going to give about Underground. Now, I say all that because when we look at High John McIndoll, I'm just going to take High John first as a name, as a being, okay, before we then graduate into mythology and legend and then practice. Any African of royal blood, royal nature, absolutely would have been broken down to the lowest degree, and would not have been voicing their royal lineage in the confines of enslavement, in that environment that we know slavery was. However, we do understand that there's a legend which may be based in truth, which may be based on a real person, that he was indeed an African prince, then captured into slavery. It is also believed that as an enslaved African, he operated in much the way that we associate Eshu, Papa Legba, Ilegwa. He operated as the trickster. Now, getting back to sort of, well, I didn't say these words, but I'm going to say them now. Coding, masking. So you can't say I'm a royal blood as an African slave in this enslaved environment, right? So you definitely can't say I'm practicing voodoo. So often the tradition is first masked, M-A-S-K-E-D, just as we mask Indian. It's first masked behind something. So it's masked behind Catholicism. It's masked behind saints. It's masked behind a particular saint, for instance. Moses was used a lot covertly between Christendom and then Hoodoo. The mother of Jesus was then covertly used between showing up like you're absolutely operating as a Catholic or a Christian, but then hiding the idea that you might absolutely be operating in voodoo, hoodoo, obia. So the idea that slaves would have even been allowed to believe someone existed that could empower them had to be kept by the master into the realm of legend. Now, it doesn't mean it can be squashed out. You know, the slaves are going to gossip, are going to spread the word, are going to share their experience with a particular person, place, or thing. But the idea that they would have been allowed to overtly show up as empowered with this information would have often created an environment where people would not have been documented. Actual real events would be elusive at best, if not intermixed into other stories, other themes. You get a lot often in the context of other works. The author is talking about something else and then mentions the slaves and then may mention a line or two of this sort of practice. And I want to be clear, it wasn't just that there was talk about hoodoo. Again, hoodoo to the white man would not have been legitimate, would not have been necessarily real. We do know there was an absolute fear of these practices by the white man, greatly motivated by that idea of revolt, revolution, Nat Turner, uprising, if you will. So again, there's more than one reason why a person, place, things, subject matter, practice about us would have been downplayed if not kept under wraps. And then among ourselves, I first said masking, then I said coding. Coding, C-O-D-I-N-G, coding. So now with coding, St. John, Moses, Jesus becomes a code for something else. So when you're in front of, a line out of underground, the black man has to wear two faces. You got the face that you wear among ourselves with each other, and then you got the face that you wear with the white man every day when you went out to pick that cotton and work those fields, and you had to endure pain, and you had to endure suffering, and you had to act like everything was okay, and you had to act like you weren't, traumatized. Otherwise, you would be greater traumatized. You'd be threatened of lynching again, the whip, torture, all of which shows up in Underground. So if you haven't seen it, please go back and watch that show. So High John was said to be of royal blood, a prince, particularly a prince, not a king, but a prince, who then in his life as a slave did miraculous things, was able to do powerful hoodoo supernatural things that then subsequently became associated with his name, and then his name was then applied to the root. Now the root itself is in the family of yams and another plant that doesn't come to my mind right now. So the plant itself was not previously identified as High John. High John was attributed to the root as the root, and series of roots, which I'm going to explain in a moment, became incorporated in our tradition. There's more than one root that now has High John, Low John, John, forms of John present in the name. And so when you're talking about the uneducated audience, the uneducated consumer who's, looking for quick magic and looking for High John, often you aren't even clear about what it is that you have, or exactly how to use it. There's more than one form, We use it for various reasons. I also want to give me a second here. I'm going to check in on my chat. I got my notes in front of me, so I'm not looking at the chat, and I don't want to miss uh, any of my questions. Thank you for alerting me to the buffering. Yes, you know, we have this issue with the buffering here on YouTube. I'm still not quite sure if it's me, if it has to do with my computer, my internet, or if that's just something we're going to have to put up with in terms of YouTube. I'm not clear about that. I'm open to figuring out ways to fix that. But I want to greet you all, each and every one. I don't want to just talk on as I can do. I want you to type your questions in capital letters. That helps me to see. James, if check your spelling. Really, at least once a week, twice a week, somebody says, you know, they're emailing me and they can't get through. And it's often, you know, make sure you're spelling it right. Don't just, you know, if you just link, please don't keep interrupting the chat. Always a blessing. Now, Hi John is first said to be or not be a real person, the symbol of liberation, the symbol of being empowered, greater than massa, because as I've said in my slave medicine broadcast, indeed the masters feared herbalists, root workers, practitioners, because we had the power of left and right hand magic. And left and right hand magic was not about doing magic. It was about healing. It was about healing versus toxicity. And we know that all plants, all herb life have a level of healing and then toxicity that can be utilized for various purposes. So he may or may not have been an African prince. And I think whether we can actualize him in documents doesn't matter. It doesn't from the power and the capsule of knowledge that is now contained within the legend of High John itself, both the man, the myth, and the herb itself, the plant. He was seen like a trickster, much like Legman Eshu. And another coding of our tradition was Cody and Burr Rabbit. There were, I believe they were called East, which were encapsulating tradition. Was a new manifestation of Eshu, was a new manifestation of the trickster spirit that tricks us based on our ego, but tricks us often for a divine purpose. Tricks us out of our own foolishness, tricks us out of our own greed and our own desire to sort of take the shortcut. That's where these characters, signifying monkey, is another character from Antebellum South that shows up to be a footprint of trying to keep track of the presence, unbroken presence of voodoo during slavery, but then its footprint into these new manifestations like hoodoo, root work, and conjure. High John went on to become not just a legend as an individual, he was a myth seen so powerful that Hyatt wrote in Folklore from Adams County, Illinois in 1835. Folklore from Adams County, Illinois in 1985, written by Hyatt. If you think that someone is trying to hoodoo you or do you some harm, you meet them, walk back 6 steps, spit right and left, and saying John over John and John the Conqueror, and they can't hurt you. And this book is available on PDF. Hurston brought the myth into the modern day when she wrote in 1943, American Mercury. American Mercury was an article. And so quoted in the article, So the brother in black offers to the United States the source of courage that endures and laughter. Hi, John the Conqueror. If the news from overseas reads bad, if the nation inside seems like it is stuck in the tar baby, listen hard and you will hear how it will be worse for those who seek to oppress us. White America, take a laugh from out of our black mouths and win. We give you High John the Conqueror. This article is also available on PDF. Zora Neale Hurston, American Mercury, 1943. Conjure subjects fed into blues music. Blues music supported conjure. White America conjured through songs sung by well-known artists like John the Conqueror Root. My pistol may snap my mojo, but I rub my root, my love tail. When I rub my root, my John the Conqueror root, ah, you know that ain't nothing that she can do, Lord. I rub my root the Conqueror. So it then shows up in pop culture. It then shows up in song. It then in folk music, blues, and of course the continued appropriation of hoodoo in documents, books, blog posts, literature, so that power around it continues to grow without now having this power to free. I keep going back to my notes, so forgive me. Y'all know my try to go back to my notes. Your questions in the chat. Questions in the chat in capital letters, so that the root, and so you're not going to have slaves, the enslaved people, using technical names, using Latin, cat's tail. You know, all these things are referencing plants that would have been common, not only in medicine, but also fruit. A big tuber like sweet potato, is the high john root. It has a pleasant, earthy odor, said to have a strong laxative effect if it is. But often when we talk about john in root work, you're talking about it as a herb. You aren't talking about it as a medicine. You are talking about it of rooting, rubbing down the root, adding the root to various medicines, gree bags, for instance. And often what's put in gree bags is not high. John is often too big to go into gree bag. It's almost like a walnut shape or bigger, and it's tougher walnut, almost like a Brazilian nut. So the high John at all. It's another plant. Um, I want to say it's St. John's wort. I want to say it's St. John's wort. There's an author, Cecil Adams, who wrote that High John the Conqueror root was the root of St. John's wort. And technically that's not true. And it does have a little finger of a knot there, but then it's going to be these thread like come off of the wort. And that's actually Low John. Low John is a ruling matters, and we often carry it in the jaw. You can't get High John in your mouth. So important in the application of conjure root work, um, to absolutely use the ancestors. I don't think you can operate in hoodoo without accessing the ancestors who created hoodoo, without accessing the fire and the spirit and the motivation behind the ancestors who created hoodoo. And again, it shows up in the blood. Now we know there was a lot of mixing, uh, not only master and slaves and the woman of the house and the slaves, but among them slaves themselves. And indeed, breeding farms where, stud men and the healthiest, said to be childbearing, enslaved women would have been kept in a particular location to just put out a dozen or more babies to now be fed into the slave system. We maintained family. We maintained as much as we could a relationship of family, but that was often broken up and not even acknowledged. That is slavery. So we deify people who show up in our lives, who rescue us, who soothe us, after we've been, whipped, who help to bring our life, to a level that we can tolerate in the environment that is white supremacy and slavery. So I wanted to talk too about the chewing of John and the application of these roots as it shows up in our practice. And today we talk about love. We talking about hitting the lottery. We talk about charity. Much of the things that would have been not of importance to us in an enslaved environment. We often do root work, conjure in war, in battle, in distress. And so this also fed the fear of these practices and negative of these. We're all just interested in the pursuit of fleshly, earthly, ungodly things. And then that was the for us even operating with this. Remembering what I said earlier in the show, all things that would have supported us, that would have benefited us, would have been dogged, would have been demonized, been abominized, would have been trampled upon. So the idea that we could support anything main that was beneficial to us was often um, lied, rewritten about, twisted, so that we ourselves didn't believe there was an out, so that we ourselves wouldn't believe that there was an option. The idea of love potions and all of this ego-based foolishness, because they're indeed pulling at your ego. Isn't indeed prosperity bigger and better than just money? Isn't the idea of not having to struggle and having what you need long term, grounded, and not just for yourself, but then for generations to follow you, bigger than just the idea of money itself? And so, all of us, whether it be in slave history or even in modern day society, when we think of Mega Millions and Powerball and all these other big lotteries that very few of us, without divine intervention, will ever interconnect with, was also a tool to keep us from looking at these practices first, secondly, as an ethno-cultural experience, which means that it's then born and birthed and passed on through a particular bloodline. And then the idea that it was somehow, and so it was dirtied up. The whole idea of conjure was dirtied up, not because of conjure itself, which is what the Christian says. Well, it's the evil, it's the devil, y'all are doing mischief. No, that was imprinted upon the conjure. Now, for those of you in the chat who may have seen Underground, you've seen Ernestine get down. You've seen Ernestine in that one going to lynch anyway because she was a runaway, and was a part of that Macon Seven group. Originally, was going to be a part of that group, and had she have, I don't want to give it up for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, but if she hadn't gone along with the white lady of the house wanted, all of them would have died and suffered and paid the cost. I think Underground does a really good job at showing how easy it was to get backed into a corner. We like to talk about house nigga, field nigga. As if one is good and one is bad, as if one is just in a wretched, deplorable condition. The film nigga, but it's somehow from the center of things, and then the house nigga is seen as somehow being too close to massa, and therefore muted, therefore toned down in some way. Underground, that the TV series does an excellent job of completely undoing that. And you see not only control that Ernestine, even though she was a slave, could influence the Massa's family, but also the rest of the house, but also the application of herbs in terms of, but also doing harm. Um, answer your questions, your comments, your requests. So please do type them in capital letters. K. Amin, if I missed some questions, I wish you could push a button and I would hear a noise or something. If you have Tamika Miller, that's a comment that you got in all capitals, but I'm gonna respond to it. That you say you have an affinity for root work. Got over 75 herbs here at your house. Um, and many of us have an affinity indeed for these plants. Now, listen, you've seen my shit. I'm just asking questions, okay? Root work. Um, you got shops, botanicas that sell herbs, okay? Even sage. I'm gonna use y'all know sage, okay? White sage is going extinct. White sage is that little roll of sage that y'all buy at the shop that's got the threads wrapped around it that you burn and you use to. Oh, white sage, which is a particular variety of sage. Now, this is why understanding your herbs is important, because it don't have to just be white sage. It could be common sage. It could be purple sage. It could be the sage in the cooking seasoning and pinch the yard right now. And we can pull off it, pick off it. We eat it. We cook with it. We make teas and tinctures with it. We use, please, I'm going to assume, Tamika, please make sure you know your herbs, understand what they are. And I want to see some pictures. I'm hope you growing some herbs. I don't care where you live in the country, there's herbs that is natural to your. Now, they might take some work to find, especially if you're in the inner city areas. In some cities, you hard pass, let alone natural vegetation growing. And all of your that you all are poisoning the water and the earth and the land with and our food with is killing off the dandelions and the clovers and the many other medicinal as well as conjure-based plants that would otherwise be growing naturally in your yard. So you're often, if you're in the city, going to have to go to more less incorporated areas. This show I talked about my former life in Chicago, Illinois, and how much time I spent at the lakefront. And if you can remember Belmont Rocks, before they modernized the lakefront, that part of the lakefront, and put down those concrete slabs. That used to just be just boulders and rocks sort of stacked up on the shoreline. So it was a little bit more natural. It provided a habitat for sea life, but it also fed herbs, plants, and plants in Chicago. There were vines bred and all sorts of herbs. So study your herb books. Learn to identify edible greenery, edible material in your environment. Another commonly overlooked plant is pine. Now, I don't care where you live at, it's a pine tree somewhere in your environment. And probably unsprayed pine trees that don't have pesticides and whatnot on it. Pine cones. Now, there are various types of pine cones. You got the little green ones, and of course, it depends on the variety. And then you got the those big woody ones that are hard and dry, almost like wood. Now, those big woody ones commonly used in slave medicine, commonly used in hoodoo, conjure, root work. You go to the store and buy pine oil, don't you? And disinfect and whatnot. There's a medicinal application in there also. You got the worst chest cold, and you with some hot water, boil to the tea, some onion, some which will help to dislocate the phlegm, um, ginger, which is an antibiotic, but also can stimulate the movement of your blood and your circulation and open up your sinuses. Um, Garlic, which is a natural antibiotic, and of course your honey, which is also a natural antibiotic. No bacteria can survive in honey, and add that to your pine cone tea, and it'll open you up like Vic salve. Some of y'all remember what Vic salve is that you rub. If you're familiar with Vic salve, maybe Hall's cough drops. That flavor, that feeling that you get, okay, that comes from pine cones. That comes from various members of the mint family. So it's not that hard to put. We had to depend on ourselves. Otherwise, you were treated like cattle. So there were those of us, and some of you in this group, like Tamika Miller, who you just have a memory for it, a taste for it, an identity for it. I can identify in my better half, my partner, Val Martinez. And we sit around and think about before Hurricane Katrina happened, that summer, we sat around and talked about what would we do for survival if there was a natural disaster or things broke down. And we talked about how to capture and kill pigeons, how to capture and kill doves, how to harvest food from nature, from your plants, from your rivers, from your water, if that's not too contaminated. So we had a closer connection to nature. We had a closer connection to the earth, Mackendall. So the usage of things like St. John root would have been natural to us, would have been organic to us. Your midwives would have known this. Your doulas would have known certain things. There are plants that were commonly used with your with women in adjusting their periods, and stopping a flow or creating a flow. They had to have this level of knowledge. Now, just like your pharmaceutical companies, we know that they have knowledge of plants, and then they take those things and turn them into synthesized, chemicalized, products with all these byproducts and side effects, but somehow we trust that more than we trust that dandelion growing in your backyard. That I have a palm tree in my backyard. I got kumquats in my backyard, banana trees in my backyard. I have elephant ears in my backyard, and herbs, plants, and roots that high John, but many of we use medicinal, and not just because you're sick, but just to maintain health. We've gotten away from eating real food, eating vegetation. Everything doesn't have to be cooked, chopped up, add a pound of sugar, a pound of salt, a pound of fat, you know, to make it neither taste good nor healthy for you. So please, Tamika, beloved, I acknowledge you and respect you. Yes, please use your land. I don't like to even grow things on my land that aren't usable. If you can't eat it, I'm probably not going to grow it. Now, there are things that people grow that are ornamental, that look nice, that people have no idea are edible. There's roses are edible. There are other uh, plants, indeed, that we utilize because they look nice, so they have color, particular texture, like elephant ear. Elephant ear is commonly used in medicinal as well as culinary, let alone what's in their food. I'm getting a lot of. I might have too many windows when the show is going on. Correct that buffering issue. But I appreciate your patience. I appreciate you all spending this time with me. That is African American, from the system, from the white supremacists, from the massa. So we had to evolution in the usage of. It's also a product of now the mixing, the synchronizing, the attempt to synchronize root work, conjure, Ifa, voodoo as somehow pagan or somehow witchcraft. And so it again open that door for people to keep repeating, keep trying to use what's more. We are in the fee, and we don't look at the much picture of it. So the voodoo is either not real in the Western mindset, or if it is real, then it's paid or gets contained to people. Those who are initiated, those who have worked to gain access to information and apply it and test it and know what's valid, those who decipher and decode, houndstooth and mama's, what is it, a mother-in-law tongue and all these names and phraseology that really herbs, herb itself, but the root, the plant, the leaf, the bark, the tree, and its application. Often the name of a thing that requires strength, that requires power. The average self-made practitioner has no idea what high John really is, medically, chemically, medicinally, or what it is, or how to do it, or how to work with it. And I absolutely don't advise putting a plant or anything in your mouth, or administrating it to anyone else without you yourself having done the work, tried, true, and tested work, and be clear about what it. Even the groceries, the packaged food at your grocery store. Do you really know what that is or what's in it? So when we start looking at work, a great deal of that knowledge, what makes it to the practice and apply it to how they bring these various elements of roots together. Come on now with your questions, comments, or requests. I have a lot of work I have to get done for space, but also in terms of this Mardi Gras day, which is upon us. I need to be sewing and getting my suit to DivinePrince at houseofthedivineprince.com. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Celery root is great, more than one person place, but there's also a peppery power embedded in celery seed that is helpful and beneficial in some work, and particularly petrol work. Give me your questions in large capitals. Mardi Gras is Amanda Leak, New Orleans, not just for Carnival, is the final day of Carnival. Carnival is going on right now. This weekend will be the first big weekend of could be, several parades throughout the weekend. But Fat Two Mardi Gras Indians, my tribe, to a African who assisted us in that venture. And I prefer indigenous to Indian or Native American. Necessarily be correct, and they're also